Hi, this is Katrina Sargent, owner and creator of Devil Doll Custom Creations. Today we're going to be doing a Maars Skinny acrylic tumbler with two different styles of drips. A slow flow or more of the lava lamp look. You can absolutely do these with any double-walled acrylic tumbler. You'll see them all over the place with the Starbucks tumblers. The Starbucks tumblers have a little bit more gap between the two acrylic layers. These Maars are very, very thin, so they shift a little bit different, but I love the look they created. I got these from saveacup.com, but you can find Maars tumblers in a lot of different places. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. You're going to want to hit that bell notification to notify you anytime I post new content, which I post every Wednesday. And like always, I'm going to have everything linked in the description below. Here are the two links for the two digital files I'm going to be using for both tumblers on my Etsy shop. They are SVGs ready to cut and use. So I started out with a cleared Maars Skinny tumbler. You need to create a small hole in the bottom of your acrylic tumbler. So I have a drill and some drill bits. I prefer to do the smallest hole possible, and I'll explain how I fill it in a minute. You absolutely don't need to do as small as I'm doing. The key is to only go through that top layer of acrylic. If you go through both layers, your tumbler is trashed. So go slowly and make sure you pull back soon as it clears that first layer. Clean off any debris or any shavings from the plastic that could go inside the tumbler. You will see those inside. So first you're going to start with vegetable glycerin. This first one I'm using food coloring, and then we're going to fill it with baby oil after the glycerin. This is my favorite syringes. They are blunted syringes. So I am just going through and trying to find one that fits very nicely in the hole I created, but it has a little wobble. I'll explain as I go. So first you're going to have a little bit of glycerin in a medicine cup, and then you're going to add your food coloring. Once that's mixed, you're going to add a couple drops of distilled water. You need to thin out this a little bit to get that nice slow flow in the tumbler versus the lava lamp look. That's what gives it a little bit different. Distilled water thins it out a little bit, but you can't mix the water in until your glycerin and color is mixed in fully, because it's going to kind of clump up and it kind of looks like coagulated blood. So if that's what you want, go for it. Baby wipes are going to be your best friend on this project. You're going to get food coloring and baby oil and glycerin all over the place. So these syringes are easy to fill. You just take off the needle part, and then you twist the needle part on once you fill your syringe, and then you're just going to add that into that hole that you made. If it's a big hole or a little hole, it doesn't really matter. So you're just going to then fill in your glycerin mix first. However much blood drips you are wanting in your tumbler is how much you're going to fill it. I did about a quarter full of the red mix before I moved on to the baby oil. You can always add more before you seal it if it's not enough, but it's hard to take away. And then you are going to then add some baby oil. I got a bigger syringe, the same size of needle tip. So I'm adding my baby oil into a cup just for ease. And you're gonna then just fill up the tumbler the rest of the way with baby oil. When you are getting to the top and you wanna get rid of that air bubble, if you tilt your tumbler at an angle, that air bubble will go to the hole. This is why I said find a syringe that is slightly smaller and it has a little wobbly in that area. The air that's trapped inside will come out around that needle you have inside that hole. You also could do two holes next to each other, one as an air hole and one as the one you're adding the baby oil into, to try to fill it up as much as possible. You do want a small air bubble. It will help everything shift easier with that small air bubble. You don't want it completely gone, but I like it smaller than it is now. So I'm just kind of tilting it and trying to fill it up as much as possible. I will put my finger on it and then flip it over and see what it looks like. I also, when I'm pretty sure it's done, I will put a little piece of transfer tape on the bottom, flip it over, and then watch it how it flows before I move on to seal anything. You're going to want to clean up everything baby oil touched with alcohol. Do not use acetone on these acrylic tumblers. Acetone eats acrylic. Your tumbler will be trashed if you use acetone. So I'm just taking a clean rag and some alcohol and cleaning up that entire surface that could have had any baby oil or glycerin on it at all. If you don't clean it up, your UV resin will not stick to that area. You will have a big problem later when it doesn't seal correctly. So I'm moving on to my next one. I've done the exact same hole with my syringes, but I'm only doing glycerin and alcohol inks. I am not using food coloring, and I am not diluting this with any distilled water. These inks are Tim Holtz. I will have them linked in the description. I am mixing two different colors together to get a lime green color. You don't have to mix them. You can use one, you can use four. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure they're mixed fully before you move on. So another thing I'm doing a little different, I'm adding a little bit of baby oil into the tumbler first to see if that stops any alcohol inks from staining the tumbler. It didn't do much difference, that icing, but I added a little bit of baby oil and then I shook it up and then let it settle before I added my glycerin mix. I was just seeing if it made any difference at all doing baby oil first versus the glycerin. I didn't see a difference, but once I added the glycerin without any distilled water is way thicker. So I did struggle to get this in to the tumbler with such a small syringe hole. I will admit that. It probably would have been smarter for me to go a little bit bigger, but I just had to put some elbow grease into it, and I got all of my green glycerin into the tumbler like I wanted, and then I filled the rest up with straight baby oil, exactly how I did the last one. So here I have added a small piece of transfer tape just to see how everything flows before I UV resin it closed. If you're happy with how it flows and moves, you can move on to the UV resin step. Clean the bottom again a couple more times with alcohol. To make sure the bottom is fully sealed, I use projector film I got at Staples, and I cut a little piece off and then I UV resin that over my hole, and then I UV resin the entire bottom. So this is what it looks like when you get it out of the package. And I'm just gonna cut a tiny little piece off and tack it down with my UV resin. This is my favorite UV resin I get off Amazon, and just a basic light that I'm gonna hold over it. So I'm just gonna be adding a little bit of UV resin around the hole and then adding that film on top of it and then putting my light on top. I am wearing a mask. I almost always wear gloves. I don't know why I'm not wearing gloves in this video, so don't come for me. I do know better. So I'm gonna put this under the UV light for about 60 seconds, and then it's just to tack it down. And now I'm gonna do the entire bottom. So I add a little bit of alcohol inks to my UV resin just to kind of blend in and make that bottom greenish. You're gonna want to add thin layers of the UV resin and build on it up. If you do too thick of a layer, your UV resin will not cure fully, and you'll have some gooey inside of it because of adding the colorant to your UV resin. Since it's not clear, you just need to be careful with that and go layers to make sure it's fully cured. So I'm just adding layers and then pulling it out to the edge and then curing it for 3 to 4 minutes. And I do the exact same thing for my red tumbler, just with red alcohol ink into my UV resin. You can prop your light up on boxes. You don't have to hold it, which is a big help, believe me. So now moving on to the decal step. This is how it comes out on my digital downloads on the SVGs. I have it broke down into 2 colors, the red and the black. You could absolutely change these, do what you want, resize them, whatever you would like. But I've created a knockout on the horror movie and the blood splatter next to it. So it's easy to line up when you're adding the 2 colors together. It has its own little place in the blood splatter. My drips, you can resize them to fit your tumblers. But these Maars tumblers, I do 9 inches wide by 1.5 inches roughly down. So I've cut everything out. Most of them are basic weeding, but I am going to show you how I reverse weed on a few. If they have small, little, delicate little cuts, I usually always reverse weed, which means I add my transfer sheet, which I use contact paper, onto the vinyl, remove the backings, and weed it off the contact paper itself. The reason I love using contact paper so much is it's really easy to add it back onto the wax side of the sheet. So you can do a hinge method really easy. So a hinge method just means you have a piece of transfer sheet that is overhang for you to be able to line up things to make sure it is straight before you remove the backing. So I'm going to do a hinge method on the first, and then the second one I am just finding that little knockout like I talked about earlier and laying it, because the knockout was going to make it straight when you line it up. And now I'm just going around and adding my little decals around the tumbler. I did make a mistake. I forgot to do my blood drips first off the top. If you do this mistake like I did, you might have to cut away some of your blood drips like you'll see me do in a second. So this one, I wanted the blood drips to be center stage, so I didn't go overboard on the decals. It's kind of just random places, and the saying. The next one, I focused more on the decals, just for two very different looks. Easiest way to add these drips is just to lay them on the tumbler. Don't worry about transfer tape. These tumblers have lines on the very top that's easy to follow. Once you have it on, you might have to peel back a few things if they folded or have bubbles, but they're very easy to do that. Just lift them back up and lay them flat. They're blood drips, right? So they're not supposed to be perfect. So this is what I mean. I had to cut away. It was over the top of the balloon, so I just cut it away. You also might have to trim up the extra overhang, so I just took a craft knife and ran it along that edge. So I'm just adding random little blood drips from my decal with just anywhere I kind of feel like it needs to go. I'm not following where it should have been, where it cut out. Just make sure everything is laying flat. And a lot of people, this is done. I don't like to send out a tumbler that vinyl can peel back on. So I always add a coat of epoxy or Brite tone. If you're using Brite tone, you have to wait for the cure time of the UV resin on the bottom to cure, but I make sure everything's sealed in. Now moving on to the next one. This is how it comes on my digital download. You can resize it. It comes in two colors, right? The lips and everything else is black. You can ungroup things. You can change them to different colors if you would like. You have two sizes of flames as well. I do the smaller one on the top, the larger one on the bottom. I am going to show you how I did it with contact paper. It was kind of a pain in the butt. Easier to not do transfer sheet, I promise you. Clean up your tumbler really well before you add your decals. I forgot to say that in the last section of the video. You just want to make sure your vinyl is completely adhered to the tumbler. So it's just a little bit of alcohol. Remember, no acetone. I am just going to follow that bottom line for my flames to go from the bottom up, exactly how I do the flames from the top down. You're going to see me struggling. I'm going to be lifting things up. I'm sorry my head keeps poking in the camera. I was hunched over this. I couldn't get it to lay correctly with the transfer sheet, so I ended up removing the transfer sheet as I worked on it just to get it to lay easier. There was a lot of folding going on with this. I thought using the transfer sheet would be easier with the cuts of the flames versus the drips. It wasn't. So I will even remove the transfer sheet completely and then lay this by hand. since I wanted these decals more prominent than the last, I made them a lot bigger. So if you wanted the saying and the silhouette to be lined up how you cut it, you need to make it a lot smaller. So I had to do them individually and then bring the saying off to the side. So I'm just making sure it is straight before I lay it down, and then I will lay the saying. I will do the hinge method on the dragon just to make sure it lines up and it fits before I lay the vinyl on the tumbler. Before I put it on my turner, which I'm just using a pool noodle arm that fits amazing in these small skinnies, I'm going to be taping off the top lip. You don't have to do this. I didn't do this for my last one. I will show you how I clean up that lip if you don't tape it off. If you are using epoxy, you do not want to use a torch or have a heat gun on this too long because it will warp. It will ruin the acrylic tumbler. If you did the tape edge, you're going to want to remove the tape. If you're using normal epoxy, after 35 to 40 minutes, I wouldn't recommend using fast set epoxy unless they're non-yellowing. And if that case, you want to remove your tape within the first 10 minutes. If you're using Brite tone, you can leave your tape on until you do 3 or 4 coats and then take a blade and cut along that edge to remove your tape. If you didn't do tape, take a baby wipe and run it along the very top edge to clean that off. I take my finger and I kind of bend it a little bit over that edge to get it off that lip fully. And then I do 3 or 4 coats of Brite tone until you can't feel the vinyl, or a coat or 2 of epoxy until you can't feel the vinyl. It's up to you. Here's the 2 different looks that each give. I did notice the alcohol inks stained the baby oil into like a light green color. The food coloring did not tint the baby oil at all. Maybe it was the type of alcohol inks I used, but it was something different for both of them. They both turned out wonderful. I love them both so much. I'm gonna be so sad when they leave my shop. I add a piece of white paper inside for the next side-by-side video. It shows a little bit more detail of the drips, so stay tuned. I hope everyone liked this tutorial. I hope you learned something. Please like, share, subscribe. It means the world to me. If you have any comments or questions, please write them in the comments. I do write back. And thank you everyone for your continued support.